We all remember Rusty said Vyke's War Spear was the best weapon in the game, don't we?
This spear has the unique benefit of trapping players in a shitty animation for 2 seconds upon being afflicted, and Light Rollers and Bleed Queens in PvP can now face the most literal interpretation of dying mad about it.
Well, I definitely do, and it's been haunting me for quite some time. Vyke's War Spear is the supposed best weapon in the game, according to Rusty, but I'm pretty sure he only said that to make that dying mad about it joke. The reality is, no matter what criteria you use, when compared to other great spears, or other weapons for that matter, this weapon is bad. Very bad. So I wanted to yap about it and finally put an end to this spirit haunting me. I haven't been able to sleep properly since then. Auxilio. So Rusty's criteria for his weapon ranking was... well, he didn't specify any. He never does. But he mentions PvP in his Vyke's review.
And Light Rollers and Bleed Queens in PvP.
So we can assume he takes PvP into account, which is our specialty. This is the list of stuff he mentions during his review about Vyke's War Spear and why it's good.
This spear has the unique benefit of trapping players in a shitty animation for 2 seconds upon being afflicted. It's a great spear, it has fire damage, it has madness buildup, it's extremely light for no damn reason, it has great scaling at +10, the skill's damage is determined by weapon level, it has a horizontal swipe as a heavy, which gives it utility against crowds. It's an early game obtainable.
So how about we focus on that? Let's ignore the madness part for now, and let's focus on the next item on the list. It's a great spear.
Very observant, Jimmy boy.
Yeah, it's a great spear. And Vyke's is probably the worst great spear in the entire game. First and foremost, it's the shortest great spear by a large margin. Vyke's War Spear is tiny. Bro's not winning any wars with that. That already is a big disadvantage when compared to other better great spears, like the lance, for example. Going back to what Rusty said about Light Rollers.
And Light Rollers and Bleed Queens in PvP can now face the most literal interpretation of dying mad about it.
It's not gonna catch any Light Rollers anytime soon. Unlike either fast or long weapons that were practically made for it. The madness has nothing to do with it. Great spears are also known for dealing pierce damage, right? All the great spears in the game have pierce light and heavy attacks to make the most of the counter damage, which is when you interrupt an enemy action with a piercing attack. They also have great in the name, so they tend to have high base damage, which means that a counter attack with a great spear tends to hurt a lot. However, counter damage is only triggered by the weapon's physical damage part, and Vyke's has split fire damage, meaning that your counterattacks will deal less damage than with other weapons. Curiously enough, the heavy horizontal sweep actually deals pierce damage, despite the animation being, well, a sweep, and starts 1 frame faster than that of regular great spears. However, this heavy attack is not unique to Vyke's, as Siluria's 3 and Barbed Staff Spear also share the same special heavy, and the hyper armor of the attack starts quite a few frames later as well. It doesn't help that Vyke's has basically double scaling requirements, and you need to increase both Dex and Fate for it to deal good damage, whereas for the Lance, you only need Strength and you get the two-handing bonus as well. If you absolutely need to use a great spear, a heavy Lance with 99 Strength and a nice Ash of War completely outperforms Vyke's at every turn. And for Dex Faith builds, the tree spear is very strong. You can obtain it earlier than Vyke's and also can be buffed with magic and consumables. Vyke's, of course, cannot be buffed. Despite that, I don't see why anyone would use a great spear for PvE. There are much better options you can use in your PvE runs that are not slow as sticks with mediocre damage. The fire damage can be covered by using a flamer weapon, since you're supposedly running Dex Faith and it's not really mandatory to use. But perhaps the worst part is that Vyke's main trait is being a madness weapon. This is completely useless in PvE. Madness can only affect tarnished enemies. 99% of the enemies and bosses you fight in a game are immune to madness. What even is the point of using Vyke's then? Damage? It's mediocre at best. Range? It's shorter than your PP. Counter damage? It has split damage. Fire damage? You're better off with a flamer weapon. Stance damage? There are better options you can obtain earlier like the Swihunter. Ash of War? Not even close to the best option in the game. Vyke's War Spear is the most mediocre weapon in the game and it doesn't stand out at anything. So PvE-wise, why Rusty chose it as the best is completely beyond me. However, I probably know what you're thinking.
But Rani, Rusty said that Vyke's War Spear will make players die mad about it. The madness is great for PvP, so it was clearly designed as a PvP weapon.
Well, yeah, If you take Madness out of context, then yeah, one would think Vyke is very strong. After all, Madness stuns you in place for 3 seconds and leaves you vulnerable to 2 additional hits. It can even proc during rolls because of phantom hits and how the netcode works. How is that not broken, you may ask? Well, the build-up is very small. It may not seem like it here because I'm standing still and my friend is just stacking hits one after the other, but in a normal duel, or even worse, in an invasion, the amount of times you'll be able to proc Madness with Vykes are very rare. You need to stay on top of your opponent with a weapon that's not very good for chasing, and is also the shortest of its category. Not to mention that if you proc this in a 1 vs 2 or 1 vs 3 scenario, it could happen that A, it triggers during a phantom hit so the Madness doesn't deal any additional damage, and your enemy's bodies can just stop you from taking the free hits, or B, the enemy dies before Madness procs, in which case you would have been better off with a Great Spear or a weapon that simply deals better damage. Let me show you what I mean. In here I spawn and I nearly immediately get assaulted by some gamers. Latency is fantastic, so the first guy goes down with 1 attack and 1 roll catch. Yep, that's how fast it goes when the latency is good. The other gamer offers a bit more resistance, but he eventually goes down as well. A third gamer then shows up, and this is where he hopefully learned what hyper armor and roll catching mean. What stands out in this invasion, aside from how little the gamers lost when latency is good, is that had I been using something like a lance instead of Vykes, the fights would have been over even faster. The point I'm trying to make is that Vykes simply felt like a handicap on this invasion, because the Madness played no part whatsoever. This is another example of Vykes just being mediocre. The first guy demonstrates it pretty easily. We do 2 trades and a roll catch, and he survives with 2 HP. So then I switch to Death Knight Access for the guaranteed kill. I suppose that by this point, you already imagine what I'm about to say. Yeah, exactly. If this was the lance instead of Vykes, the hard swap to the Access would not have been necessary. But anyway, the first guy goes down, leaving only Colossal Guy. Not much to say about this one. If I try to trade, I get fucked. So I just space his attacks and counter, where Vyke excels a bit because of the latency by applying pressure with the Madness. But alas, it never procced, so it might as well not been there. On this one, I invade 2 guys in Renala's room. Already a bad start because Vykes is not the best weapon for fighting multiple gamers. Both players start going ham on me, with one of them even shooting big boy spells, and after a while of being overwhelmed by them, a gamer pops up. They seem to have the drive finger activated, which on Seamless allows for multiple invaders in your world, but in any case, this is now a 2 vs 2, which is basically 2 1 vs 1. And how long do you think the blasphemous gamer lasted by himself? That's right, a grand total of 6 seconds. You can count them. Vyke's damage is not great, but counter damage is still counter damage, especially since I'm using the Spear Talisman. 1 magical roll catch and a few hits was enough to send this gamer to the Shadow Realm. And then we go bully the other guy with my new buddy. Also notice that with the other gamer, the Madness didn't proc a single time, by the way. But anyway, the other guy goes down and points for the bad red man team. But what about the Ash of War, I hear you say? Surely the Madness Ash of War has to be useful in PvP. Well, yeah, if you can land it. Frenzy Flame Thrust deals decent damage and Madness buildup, but it's just so slow. It's a poopier version of Storm Assault, because that one at least stuns the enemy for the plunge attack in order to keep them in place. Vykes gives you 3 business days to get away from it. However, it does have hyper armor frames at the beginning that can tank up to great swords and super armor during the jump. So if some very silly gamer still decides to attack you, that's a trade you're most likely to win. It also leaves a trail of Madness fire on the ground that deals both a bit of damage and Madness buildup. Let's see how it works during an invasion. On this one, we find a guy fighting the PvE alone. We meme a bit with an electric bomba and we run up to him for a trade. A trade that would have finished the invasion if... well, you get the point already. We chase the guy, and instead of finishing him, we give him a little room so the fight lasts a bit more. We dodge some attacks, we do a jump attack, which are great on Great Spears, and then we try the Ash of War and we trade with it. The unlandable Ash of War deals a good chunk of damage because the Madness procs. It would have been very funny if it didn't. And the Lingering Fire finishes the guy off. This only worked because we were fighting just one guy. And the lance would have done a better job anyways. A heavy lance with Flaming Strike is probably one of the best PvP combinations in the game. Amazing range, insane priority and roll catches with Flaming Strike, great piercing damage heavy attacks, can be buffed with greases. Vyke's ain't got shit on it. Not to mention that Vyke's whole gimmick in PvP can be countered by eating madness boluses or equipping stuff that increases your focus. It's still not completely useless though. If you're fighting just one person with a bit of latency, Vyke's can be alright, I suppose. Allow me to explain. This one I think is one of the only examples where Vyke's was not a bad choice. A bit of spacing here and there and a few phantom hits did the trick well enough. The fact it's a 1v1 with a bit of latency made the slow madness build-up apply pressure to the guy, eventually proccing and allowing for a free finish-up. Lance would have still been a better choice because of the damage, range, and better Rush of War options, but Vyke's was not completely doodoo here. But this also speaks about the quality of the opponent, because anyone with 2 brain cells would have just played around the madness with boluses and such. Needless to say, this cannot be done in a 1 vs 2 or 1 vs 3 scenario. Así que Vyke seguiría siendo una poronga ahí. On this one we find Luffy and his sidekick Kevin, who for some reason is allergic to leveling vigor. He also fat rolls, by the way. He's like a super Kevin. Anyway, his insanely high latency allows Kevin to live longer than he should, allowing Madness also to build and proc. And it procs during his roll because he's from Saturn or whatever. The Madness procs, he gets stunned, he takes no damage because it's a phantom hit, so I finished the job. Kevin would have been long dead before Madness procced if this was a normal fight, like that one low latency invasion. Goes to show just how impractical Vyke is. The fight would have been over in probably 1 hit with a lance or something else. It did help that this was on high latency, but do you see the guy we're fighting? Come on. Luffy dies off screen on his way to One Piece, and then Kevin comes back for more. We toy with him a bit and then he dies. Nothing special after that. Those are probably the only scenarios where you could say, I could switch the Vykes. Why not? An opponent with high latency and low skill. Very low skill. It's not really optimal, but it's not a bad choice either. Desgraciadamente, that's as far as Vykes can realistically go. Most of the time, it can outright be detrimental, and you may just need to hard swap to something else. In here, we find 2 guys in the tiny set of rooms before Malenia. One of them is a mage, and the other guy has bleed. Vyke's is not a good choice for this. We still try to go for it with a Rush of War that lands, but doesn't proc Madness. We obviously get blasted with pew-pews, so we need to retreat for cover. And this is where I say fuck it and switch to Rakshasas. Trying to beat this invasion with Vyke's would have been a pain in the ass. But Rakshasas finished the job with 2 well-placed running attacks. I believe the difference in weapon efficiency is glaring by this point. But yeah, we switched to Vyke's for the mage, who surprisingly leveled bigger. Commendable, to be honest. Still, that fight turned out exactly how you expect. He didn't last long, and even though he took many hits, the madness didn't proc. Don't you just love Vyke's war noodle? So yeah, that's basically it. I don't know what Rusty was smoking to say this was the best weapon in Elden Ring. He also made a community post saying that Vyke's was probably not the best weapon, that Moen's Great Spear was, which is not true. But that would leave Vyke's as the second best, which is also not true. Him also talking about it being strong in PvP just because it has madness was also a bit funny. Forgive me, but I don't think he's too burst in PvP. That's just a hunch I have. And yeah, Vyke's is bolas. Ciao.